The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Silver Spur Saloon, and when the door swung open, a woman stepped down onto the dusty street of Oroville, California, looking like she had walked through every kind of hell the frontier could offer. Her dress hung in shreds around her ankles, the once fine fabric now little more than strips of faded calico held together by determination and a few desperate stitches. Dust caked every inch of her, turning her hair from whatever color it had been into a dull gray-brown. Blood stained one sleeve where thorns, or perhaps something worse, had torn through. Her boots, if they could still be called that, were held together with twine, and her face bore the hollow, haunted look of someone who had survived something they never expected to live through. Georgia Lawson stepped onto that wooden sidewalk in the summer of 1876, and every eye on the street turned to stare. Women pulled their children closer. Men whispered behind their hands. Someone laughed, sharp and cruel, from somewhere down the street. She stood there swaying slightly, one hand still gripping the stage-coach door like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The driver, a grizzled old-timer named Pete, climbed down from his seat and handed her a small cloth bundle, everything she owned in the world now, apparently. "Good luck to you, miss," Pete said quietly, tipping his hat. There was kindness in his eyes and pity too, which somehow hurt worse than the cruelty. Georgia nodded, unable to find words past the lump in her throat. She had not spoken much in the 3 days since the stagecoach had found her walking along the road outside Sacramento, half dead from thirst and exposure. The other passengers had kept their distance, as if poverty and misfortune might be catching. She turned slowly, surveying the main street of Oroville. It was a mining town, she knew, though past its prime now that the easy gold had been panned out of the Feather River. False-fronted buildings lined both sides of a wide dirt street. The saloon, a general store, a hotel, a livery stable, a church with a simple white steeple. The same as every other town she had passed through in the last terrible month since her world had fallen apart. A man emerged from the livery stable across the street, tall and lean in worn denim and a faded blue shirt. He moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, leading a magnificent roan mare by the bridle. The horse gleamed in the afternoon sun, well cared for and obviously loved. The man stopped when he saw her, and Georgia braced herself for the look she had become so familiar with in recent weeks. The judgment, the dismissal, the casual cruelty that people showed to those they considered beneath them. But when their eyes met across that dusty street, what she saw in his face was not what she expected. Xavier Davidson had been mucking out stalls when he heard the stagecoach arrive, and he had brought Rosie out for her afternoon exercise, planning to ride up into the foothills before the day got too hot. He was 26 years old, had been working as a ranch hand and occasional cowboy since he was 15, and he prided himself on being a decent judge of character. What he saw when he looked at the woman in tatters was not a vagrant or a fallen woman or any of the other harsh labels he could hear people already whispering. He saw someone who had fought to survive, someone who had made it this far on sheer grit and determination. He saw strength in the set of her shoulders despite the obvious exhaustion. He saw pride in the way she held her head up even as people stared and whispered. He saw someone worth knowing. Xavier handed Rosie's reins to the stable boy who had followed him out and walked across the street, his boots raising small puffs of dust with each step. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse as the novelty wore off, people returning to their business with a few last backward glances and knowing looks. He stopped a respectful distance from her, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough that he would not crowd her. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably no more than 22 or 23. Her eyes were an unusual shade of green, like new leaves in spring, and they watched him with wary exhaustion. "Miss," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I do not mean to intrude, but you look like you could use a decent meal and maybe some help getting situated. My name is Xavier Davidson. I work at the Double R Ranch just north of town, and I know the folks around here pretty well. I would be happy to point you toward anyone who might be hiring if you are looking for work." Georgia stared at him, waiting for the catch, the cruel joke, the proposition that would make his real intentions clear. But he just stood there, patient and calm, his brown eyes steady and kind. "I do not have money for a meal," she said finally, her voice rough from disuse and dried out from thirst. "I do not have money for anything." "Did not ask if you did," Xavier replied easily. "Asked if you were hungry. The boarding house down the street serves a decent stew, and Mrs. Chen does not much care who is paying as long as someone does. I was planning to eat there myself before heading back to the ranch. You would be welcome to join me." "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the suspicion that the last month had taught her. Xavier considered the question seriously, not taking offense. "I suppose because my mother raised me to help people when they need it, and because you look like you have had a rough time of it and could use a friend. Also, if I am being completely honest, because everyone else in this town just looked at you like you were trash to be swept aside, and that did not sit right with me." Something in George's chest, something that had been clenched tight for weeks, loosened slightly. Not much, not enough to let her guard down completely, but enough that she could take a full breath for the first time in what felt like forever. "I look like a beggar," she said quietly, glancing down at her ruined dress. Xavier shrugged. "Clothes do not make you. Your heart does, and yours is gold. I can see that clear as day, even if nobody else is looking hard enough." Georgia felt tears sting her eyes, hot and unexpected. She blinked them back fiercely. She had cried enough over the past weeks, cried until she had no tears left, and she would not start again now in front of this kind stranger. "I do not even know you," she whispered. "No," Xavier agreed, "but that is easy enough to fix. Come have some lunch. Tell me your story if you want to, or do not if you would rather not, and we will see about getting you sorted. No strings attached, no expectations. Just one human being helping another because it is the right thing to do." He extended his hand, not to take hers but palm up in invitation. A choice, not a demand. Georgia looked at that outstretched hand for a long moment. She thought about what had brought her here, about the long, terrible road from her old life to this dusty street in a California mining town. She thought about trust, and how it had been broken, about kindness, and how rare it had proven to be. Then she thought about how tired she was of being alone, of fighting every battle by herself, of having no one in the world who cared if she lived or died. "My name is Georgia Lawson," she said, and placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and calloused and steady, and they walked together down the wooden sidewalk toward the boarding house. Mrs. Chen's establishment was a two-story building with faded yellow paint and a wide front porch. The dining room was small but clean, with 5 tables covered in checkered cloths and wildflowers in mason jars. The smell of beef stew and fresh baked bread filled the air, and Georgia's stomach cramped painfully, reminding her that she had not eaten anything beyond a few bites of jerky in 2 days. Mrs. Chen herself was a small Chinese woman with iron gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Georgia up and down when they entered, and Xavier half expected her to refuse them service. Mrs. Chen ran a respectable establishment after all, and appearance mattered in a town like Oroville. But Mrs. Chen had survived her own journey to California, had buried a husband and 2 children in the gold fields, and had clawed her way to respectability through sheer determination. She recognized a survivor when she saw one. "Sit," she said, gesturing to a table by the window. "I bring food." Xavier guided Georgia to the table and pulled out a chair for her. She sat carefully, as if afraid the furniture might collapse under her, and folded her hands in her lap. He noticed they were shaking slightly. Mrs. Chen returned quickly with 2 bowls of stew, thick with vegetables and chunks of beef, and a basket of bread still warm from the oven. She set them down without comment and disappeared back into the kitchen. Georgia stared at the food like she could not quite believe it was real. Xavier picked up his spoon and started eating, giving her space to process, to adjust, to decide what to do next. After a moment, she picked up her own spoon with trembling hands and took a small bite. Then another. Then she was eating like someone starving, which she probably was, though she tried to maintain some dignity about it. Xavier ate his own meal and did not stare, did not comment, just let her eat in peace. When she finally slowed down, having cleaned her bowl and eaten 3 pieces of bread, he pushed his water glass toward her. "Drink," he said gently. "Slowly, or you will make yourself sick." She drank, and some color began to return to her face. When she set the glass down, she looked at him properly for the first time, really looked, and he saw her taking his measure the way he had taken hers. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked again, and this time there was less suspicion and more genuine confusion, as if kindness was a foreign language she had forgotten how to speak. "Why would I not be?" Xavier replied. "You have done nothing to me. You are clearly in a bad situation through no fault of your own, if I am reading things right. And you look like someone worth knowing, once you have had a chance to get your feet under you again. You do not know anything about me. I could be a thief or a murderer or worse." "Could be," Xavier acknowledged, "but I do not think so. I have been around enough people to know the difference between someone who is bad and someone who has had bad things happen to them. You are the latter." Georgia was quiet for a moment, turning her empty bowl in her hands. "I was married," she said finally, the words coming slow and painful, "to a man named Samuel Porter. We had a small farm outside Sacramento. It was not much, but it was ours. Or I thought it was ours." Xavier waited, sensing there was more, not wanting to push. "Samuel died 4 months ago. Heart gave out while he was working the fields. 1 minute he was fine, the next he was gone." Her voice was flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they have told a story too many times to feel it anymore. "I thought I would inherit the farm, but it turned out Samuel had debts I did not know about. Gambling debts, mostly. The bank took the farm. His creditors took everything else, every stick of furniture, every tool, every animal. They would have taken the clothes off my back if they thought they could sell them." "You had nowhere to go?" Xavier asked gently. "I had an aunt in San Francisco, my mother's sister. I thought maybe she would take me in, at least until I could find work and get on my feet. I sold my wedding ring to pay for the stagecoach fare." "But she would not help you," Georgia laughed, bitter and harsh. "She took one look at me and said she could not have a penniless widow bringing shame to her household. Said I must have done something to drive my husband to gambling and drink. Closed the door in my face before I could even explain." She fell silent, and Xavier saw her fighting back tears again, saw her jaw clench with determination not to break down. "I tried to find work in Sacramento, but no one would hire me. I did not have references, did not have proper clothes, did not have anywhere to stay. I slept in doorways and under bridges, ate what I could find. There were men who offered to help, but their help always came with a price I was not willing to pay." Xavier felt anger kindle in his chest, not at her but at the world that could treat someone so cruelly, that could look at a woman in desperate need and see only an opportunity to exploit. I started walking, Georgia continued. I do not even know why. I thought maybe if I could get to a smaller town, somewhere that needed workers, I could find something. Anything. I did not care what kind of work, as long as it was honest and would put food in my belly and a roof over my head. How long were you walking? 3 weeks maybe. I lost track of days. Some nights I found barns to sleep in. Some nights I just slept on the ground. I ran out of food after the first week. Drank from streams. Ate berries when I could find them, though I got sick once from eating something I should not have. She gestured to her torn sleeve, and Xavier saw what looked like claw marks beneath the blood. I got caught in some brush running from a mountain lion 2 days ago. Or maybe it was 3 days. I am not sure anymore. I thought I was going to die out there. Then the stagecoach came along and the driver took pity on me. He let me ride for free, said he had daughters and could not stand the thought of leaving me out there. That was Pete Summers, Xavier said. Good man. Better than most I have met recently. Georgia met his eyes. Better than most, but maybe not as good as you, Xavier Davidson. You did not have to do any of this. You did not have to care. Maybe I just could not stand to see someone treated poorly when I could do something about it. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. You said you were looking for work. What kind of experience do you have? I can cook and clean and sew. I can tend a garden and preserve food. I kept house for Samuel and me, and I did laundry for other families to earn extra money. I am not afraid of hard work, and I am honest. I do not steal and I do not lie, and I will do whatever needs doing if it is decent work. Xavier nodded slowly. The double R is always looking for help in the kitchen and with the laundry. It is a big operation, 20 cowboys and ranch hands, plus the family. Mrs. Rodriguez does most of the cooking, but she has been saying for months that she needs an assistant. The work is hard and the pay is not great, but it comes with room and board, and the Rodriguezes are good people. Hope flickered in Georgia's eyes, quick and almost painful to see. You think they might hire me? Looking like this? I think if I vouch for you, they will at least give you a chance. Mrs. Rodriguez is not the type to judge someone by their clothes. She came to California during the gold rush with nothing but the dress on her back and built a life through hard work. She respects that in other people. Why would you vouch for me? You just met me. Xavier smiled. Because I am a good judge of character, and because I believe you are exactly who you say you are. Someone who has had bad luck but is determined to make something of herself. That is worth vouching for. Georgia stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something shift in her expression. The wariness was still there, but underneath it was something else. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of wonder, as if she had forgotten that people could be genuinely kind without wanting something in return. I do not know how to thank you, she said quietly. You can thank me by taking the job if Mrs. Rodriguez offers it, working hard, and giving yourself a chance to start over. That is all the thanks I need. Mrs. Chen appeared at the table with 2 cups of coffee and a slice of apple pie on a plate. She set the pie in front of Georgia with a look that dared her to refuse. Eat, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Too skinny. Need more food. Georgia picked up her fork, and Xavier saw tears sliding silently down her cheeks as she took the first bite. She tried to wipe them away quickly, embarrassed, but he pretended not to notice, giving her what privacy he could. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, and Xavier paid Mrs. Chen at the counter, adding a generous tip that made the older woman nod in approval. Then they stepped back out into the afternoon heat, and Xavier led Georgia down the street to the general store. What are we doing here? Georgia asked, stopping on the sidewalk. You are going to need some proper clothes if you are going to apply for that job, Xavier said practically. Cannot very well meet Mrs. Rodriguez looking like you just survived a war. I told you I do not have any money. I know, but I do, and I have more than I need right now. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back once you are working and have earned a few wages. Georgia shook her head stubbornly. You have already bought me lunch. I cannot let you buy me clothes too. That is too much. I will not be indebted to anyone ever again. Xavier heard the steel in her voice and understood. After what she had been through, after losing everything to her dead husband's debts, the last thing she wanted was to owe someone else. All right, he said. How about this? I loan you the money for one dress, one that is suitable for working. You wear it to meet Mrs. Rodriguez. If she hires you, you pay me back out of your first wages. If she does not hire you, you keep the dress and we call it even. No debt, no obligation. Why would you do that? If she does not hire me, you will have wasted your money. Money is meant to be used to help people. If I wasted helping you, that is still money better spent than most things I could buy. Besides, I do not think it will be a waste. I think you are going to get that job. Georgia studied his face, looking for the angle, the catch, the hidden motive. But Xavier just looked back at her with those steady brown eyes, patient and kind, and she could not find anything but sincerity. One dress, she said finally, and I will pay you back every cent. Deal. The general store was run by a man named Thomas Wright, who had owned the place for 15 years and knew everyone in town. He looked up when the bell over the door jangled, and his expression flickered with recognition when he saw Georgia, then surprise when he saw she was with Xavier. Xavier, Thomas said cautiously, what can I do for you? Miss Lawson needs a dress suitable for working, Xavier said pleasantly, as if there was nothing unusual about this situation at all. Something practical and well made. And probably some undergarments and a pair of boots too, if you have any that will fit her. Thomas glanced at Georgia's ruined clothing and bare feet visible through her broken boots. I see. Well, I have some ready-made dresses in the back. Let me get my wife. She would be better at helping with sizing. He disappeared into the back room and they heard low voices discussing something. After a moment, Mrs. Wright emerged, a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair. She looked at Georgia with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years helping women find clothes that fit. Come with me, dear, she said, and there was compassion in her voice. Let us see what we can find for you. She led Georgia to a small curtained area at the back of the store where several dresses hung on hooks. Xavier stayed by the front counter, examining a display of pocket knives to give them privacy. You are a lucky girl, he heard Mrs. Wright say quietly. Xavier Davidson is one of the best men in this town. If he is helping you, you must have made a good impression. He does not take to people easily. Georgia's reply was too soft to hear, but after a few minutes, she emerged wearing a simple dark blue calico dress that fit reasonably well. It was plain and practical, with long sleeves and a high collar, exactly the kind of thing a ranch hand would wear for kitchen work. Mrs. Wright had also found her a pair of sturdy boots that laced up the front. The transformation was remarkable. Clean her up, give her a chance to wash the trail dust away, and Georgia Lawson would be a beautiful woman. But even now, in that simple dress with her hair still tangled and her face still dirty, she looked like herself again. She looked like someone with dignity and purpose. How much? Xavier asked Thomas. The dress is $2. The boots are $1.50, and Clara threw in some undergarments and stockings. Call it $5 even. Xavier counted out the money and handed it over. Georgia stood stiffly, watching the transaction with something like pain in her eyes. He could tell how much it cost her to accept this help, to be in a position where she needed charity. "Thank you," she said to Mrs. Wright. "I will take good care of these." "I know you will, dear," Clara Wright replied. "Good luck to you." They left the store with Georgia carrying her old ruined clothes in a bundle, and Xavier led her back toward the livery stable where Rosie was waiting. "The Double R is about 5 miles north of town," he explained. "We can ride double if you do not mind. Rosie is strong enough to carry us both." Georgia nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. In the span of 2 hours, her entire situation had changed. She had gone from desperate and hopeless to fed and clothed and on her way to a potential job. All because one man had decided to see her as a human being worth helping instead of trash to step over. Xavier swung up into the saddle and then extended his hand down to her. She took it, and he pulled her up behind him with easy strength. She settled onto the horse's back, very aware of how close she was to this stranger who had shown her more kindness in an afternoon than most people had in months. "Hold on," he said, and she wrapped her arms cautiously around his waist as he urged Rosie forward. They rode out of town at an easy walk, and Georgia watched Oroville disappear behind them. The land opened up into rolling foothills covered in dry grass and scattered oak trees. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, and the air smelled of dust and wild sage. "It is beautiful here," Georgia said, almost against her will. She had been so focused on survival that she had stopped seeing the world around her, had stopped noticing things like sunlight and scenery. "It is," Xavier agreed. "Different from back east, I imagine, but beautiful in its own way. The mountains over there, those are the Sierras, snow-capped year-round on the highest peaks. The river runs through the valley, good for fishing if you know where to look. It is a hard land, but it is honest. It does not pretend to be anything it is not." "Where are you from originally?" "Texas." "My family had a small ranch outside Houston. I came to California when I was 18, looking for adventure and opportunity. Found both, though not always in the ways I expected." "You miss Texas?" Xavier was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. I miss my family, my younger sisters especially. But this is home now. I have been here for 8 years, and I cannot imagine going back. California gets in your blood if you let it." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Georgia found herself relaxing slightly, lulled by the rhythm of the horse's movement and the warmth of the sun. It was the first time in weeks she had felt even remotely safe. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course." "Why did you really help me? And please do not say it is just because your mother raised you right or because it was the decent thing to do. I need to know the real reason." Xavier thought about his answer carefully. "About 3 years ago, I went through a rough patch. I got thrown from a horse and broke my leg badly. Could not work for months. I had some savings, but not enough, and I ran through them fast paying the doctor and buying food. I was about ready to give up, maybe head back to Texas and admit defeat, when one of the other ranch hands, a man named Carlos, stepped in and helped me. He loaned me money, made sure I had what I needed, never asked for anything in return. Told me that is just what people do for each other when things get hard." He paused, guiding Rosie around a boulder in the path. "When I tried to pay him back later, he told me to pay it forward instead. Help someone else when they need it. So that is what I have tried to do ever since. I guess you could say Carlos taught me that we are all just one bad break away from being in desperate circumstances, and the measure of a person is how they treat others when they have the power to help or hurt. What happened to Carlos? He is still at the Double R. You will meet him if you get the job. He is the head wrangler now, probably the best hand with horses I have ever seen." Georgia absorbed this, understanding better now. Xavier was not helping her out of pity or because he wanted something from her. He was helping her because someone had helped him once, and he believed in passing that kindness along. "I will pay you back," she said firmly. "Every cent for the clothes, and I will pay Carlos back too, even though he did not ask for it. He will appreciate that, though he will probably try to refuse. He is stubborn that way." They crested a rise, and Georgia saw the Double R Ranch spread out in the valley below. It was bigger than she had expected, a sprawling complex of buildings including a large main house, a bunkhouse, several barns and corrals and various outbuildings. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and she could see men moving around the property, going about the evening chores. "It is massive," she breathed. "The Rodriguez family has been here since before California was even a state. They have built something lasting. They are good employers, fair and honest. You would be lucky to work here, but they would be lucky to have you too. Remember that when you meet them. You are not begging for charity. You are offering your skills and your labor in exchange for fair wages. You have value, Georgia Lawson, no matter what your circumstances are right now." Those words steadied something inside her, reminding her of who she had been before everything fell apart. She had been a competent, hard-working woman who took pride in her skills. She could be that person again. Xavier rode down the hill and into the ranch yard. A few men looked up from their work, curious about the stranger riding behind him, but no one stared rudely. Xavier dismounted and helped Georgia down, then handed Rosie's reins to a teenage boy who came running over. "Thanks, Johnny. Give her a good rub down and extra oats. She earned it today." "Sure thing, Xavier," the boy said, grinning. Xavier led Georgia toward the main house, a large adobe structure with a red tile roof and a wide veranda wrapped around the front. Flower boxes filled with bright red geraniums hung from the porch railing, and the windows gleamed clean in the late afternoon light. Before they reached the steps, the front door opened and a woman emerged. She was probably in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a braid and strong features that spoke of both Spanish and Native American heritage. She wore a practical work dress covered by an apron, and she moved with the confidence of someone completely in charge of her domain. "Xavier," she said, and her voice carried a slight accent that made her words musical. "You are back early. I was not expecting you until after dark." "I ran into a situation in town, Mrs. Rodriguez," Xavier said respectfully. "This is Miss Georgia Lawson. She is new to Oroville and looking for work. I thought she might be a good fit to help you in the kitchen if you are still looking for an assistant. Mrs. Rodriguez turned her sharp eyes on Georgia, and Georgia fought the urge to fidget under that penetrating gaze. She stood straight, met the older woman's eyes, and tried to project competence and confidence even though she felt neither. "You have experience cooking for large groups, Mrs. Rodriguez asked directly. "I have cooked for farm workers during harvest season, madam. 20 men at a time. I can make bread and stews and roasts. I can preserve vegetables and fruits. I can butcher chickens and cure meat. I am a hard worker, and I learn quickly if there are things I do not already know. Where are you from? Sacramento area originally. I was married and kept house for my husband and took in laundry for extra money. He passed away 4 months ago, and I lost the farm to his debts. I have been traveling since then, looking for work and a fresh start." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly, and Georgia could see her making calculations, weighing risks and benefits. "Xavier Davidson does not recommend people lightly. If he brought you here, he must think you are worth my time. But I need to know you are reliable. I cannot have someone who will work for a week and then disappear. This ranch runs on consistency." "I am not going anywhere," Georgia said firmly. "I need this job, but more than that, I need a place to belong. I am tired of wandering." I want to settle down and build a new life. If you give me a chance, I will prove myself worth keeping." Something in Mrs. Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "Come inside. You can wash up and I will show you the kitchen. We will try you out for a few days, see how you manage. If it works out, the job is yours permanently. Wages are $30 a month plus room and board. You will share a room with my daughter, Esperanza. She helps with the cooking too. $30 a month. It was more than Georgia had dared hope for. It was enough to save some money, enough to eventually have a small cushion against disaster. "Thank you, madam," Georgia said, and her voice shook slightly with relief. "You will not regret this." "I had better not," Mrs. Rodriguez said dryly, but there was a hint of warmth in her tone. "Come. I will show you where you will be staying." Georgia glanced back at Xavier, who smiled encouragingly. "I will be around," he said. "If you need anything, just ask for me." Then Mrs. Rodriguez was leading her into the house, and Georgia's new life was beginning. The main house was cool and spacious, with thick adobe walls that kept out the heat. Mrs. Rodriguez led her through a large living area with comfortable furniture and woven rugs on the wooden floors, past a formal dining room with a long table that could seat 20, and into a kitchen that made Georgia's eyes widen. It was enormous, with 2 large wood stoves, multiple work tables, shelves lined with pots and pans and dishes, and a pantry that seemed to go on forever. A young woman, probably around 19 or 20, was kneading bread dough at one of the tables. She looked up when they entered, curiosity bright in her dark eyes. "Esperanza, this is Georgia Lawson. She will be helping us in the kitchen and sharing your room. Georgia, this is my daughter, Esperanza Rodriguez." "Hello," Esperanza said, smiling. She had her mother's strong features and her father's light brown eyes, and there was warmth and friendliness in her expression. "Welcome to the Double R. I am so glad Mother finally found someone to help. I have been begging her for months." "Thank you," Georgia said. "I am grateful for the opportunity." "Esperanza will show you where to wash up and where you will be sleeping," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "We serve dinner at 6 o'clock. That gives you about an hour. You can start helping tomorrow morning. Tonight, just observe and get your bearings." Esperanza wiped her floury hands on her apron and came around the table. "Come on. I will show you around." She led Georgia back through the house and up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The room she showed Georgia into was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds, a wardrobe, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. "You can have that bed," Esperanza said, gesturing to the one by the window. "There is water in the pitcher, and there are towels in the wardrobe. Take your time getting cleaned up. I need to finish that bread, but I will come get you when it is time for dinner." She left, closing the door quietly behind her, and Georgia stood alone in the room, almost unable to believe this was real. A bed. A real bed with clean sheets and a quilt. A roof over her head. A job. Safety. She moved to the washstand on shaking legs and poured water into the basin. It was cool and clean, and when she began washing the weeks of dirt and trail dust from her face and hands, it felt like washing away more than just grime. It felt like washing away the worst of what she had endured, like starting fresh. There was a small mirror above the washstand, and when Georgia finally looked at herself, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older than her 23 years, worn down by hardship. But there was something else there too now. A spark of hope, faint but real. She washed as thoroughly as she could manage with the basin and pitcher, wishing desperately for a full bath. Her hair was a tangled mess, and it took her nearly 20 minutes to work through the knots with her fingers. By the time Esperanza knocked on the door, Georgia looked more presentable, though still clearly someone who had been through an ordeal, Dinner in the main house was a revelation. The dining room table was crowded with ranch hands and family members, maybe 25 people in all, and the noise and laughter and easy camaraderie made Georgia's throat tight. She could not remember the last time she had been part of something like this, something that felt like family, even though these people were all strangers. Mrs. Rodriguez introduced her briefly to the assembled group, explaining that she was the new kitchen assistant, and Georgia received nods and welcomes from around the table. Xavier was there, seated near the middle, and he caught her eye and smiled reassuringly. The food was abundant and delicious: platters of roasted beef and potatoes, bowls of beans and rice, fresh tortillas and vegetables from the ranch garden. Georgia ate carefully, very aware that her stomach had shrunk from weeks of near starvation and that she needed to take it slowly. She sat next to Esperanza, who kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation, pointing out different people and explaining how the ranch worked. There was Mr. Rodriguez, a quiet man with a weathered face and kind eyes. There were the ranch hands, a mix of Mexican, white, and even a few Chinese workers, all treated with equal respect at this table. There was Carlos, the head wrangler Xavier had mentioned, a man in his 40s with graying hair and scarred hands that spoke of a lifetime working with horses. And there was Xavier, who looked completely at home here, laughing at someone's joke and passing platters of food with easy familiarity. Georgia watched him when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand this man who had changed her life in the span of an afternoon. After dinner, Esperanza insisted on showing Georgia around the ranch, even though the sun was setting and the light was fading. They walked through the barn where the horses nickered softly in their stalls, past the bunkhouse where some of the men were playing cards on the front porch, and down to the chicken coop where Esperanza scattered feed for the hens. "So Xavier found you in town?" Esperanza asked as they walked. There was curiosity in her voice but no judgment. "Yes, I arrived on the afternoon stagecoach. He was kind enough to help me when no one else would." "That sounds like Xavier. He is one of the good ones. Keeps to himself mostly, works harder than anyone else, but when someone needs help, he is always the first to step up." "Have you known him long?" "About 6 years. He came to work here not long after I turned 14. I had the most ridiculous crush on him for about 2 years, Esperanza said, laughing at herself. But he only ever saw me as a kid sister. Eventually, I got over it and we became friends instead. Georgia felt something odd twist in her chest at the mention of Esperanza's crush, though she could not have explained why. She had no claim on Xavier, no reason to feel anything one way or another about his romantic history. "Does he have someone?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "A sweetheart or a wife?" "No. There was a woman a few years back, Susan something or other, but it did not work out. She wanted him to give up ranch work and move to San Francisco, open a shop or something respectable. Xavier said he would rather cut off his own arm than spend his life stuck in a city. They parted ways, and he has been alone ever since." They walked back toward the house as full darkness fell, and oil lamps began glowing in windows across the ranch. The night air was cool and pleasant, a relief after the heat of the day. "Thank you," Georgia said quietly, "for being so welcoming. I know I must look like a charity case." "You look like someone who has been through something difficult and survived," Esperanza replied seriously. "That is nothing to be ashamed of. We have all had hard times. What matters is what you do with your second chance." Georgia thought about that as she lay in bed later, listening to Esperanza's soft breathing from across the room. A second chance. That was what this was. An opportunity to rebuild her life, to become someone new, to leave behind the grief and loss that had defined her for months. She thought about Xavier's words, spoken so simply but carrying so much weight. Clothes do not make you. Your heart does, and yours is gold. No one had seen value in her in so long that she had started to believe there was none. But Xavier had looked past the rags and the dirt and the desperation and seen something worth saving. That meant more than she could ever express. Georgia fell asleep thinking about kind brown eyes and steady hands, and a voice that spoke of integrity and decency in a world that had shown her precious little of either. She woke before dawn to the sound of a rooster crowing, and for a moment she panicked, disoriented and unsure where she was. Then memory returned, and she sat up to find Esperanza already dressing in the gray pre-dawn light. "Time to start the day," Esperanza said cheerfully. "We need to have breakfast ready for the men by 6 o'clock. They start work at sunrise and they are always starving." Georgia dressed quickly in her new calico dress and followed Esperanza downstairs. Mrs. Rodriguez was already in the kitchen, stoking the fires in both stoves and pulling ingredients from the pantry. "Good morning, Georgia. I hope you slept well. Today I want to see how you manage with basic cooking. Can you make biscuits?" "Yes, madam." "Then you will make 6 dozen biscuits while Esperanza and I handle the eggs and bacon. Flour is in that barrel, lard is in the crock on the shelf, and there is buttermilk in the cold pantry. Show me what you can do." Georgia rolled up her sleeves and got to work, falling into a rhythm that her hands remembered even if her mind was still foggy with sleep. She had made biscuits hundreds of times, could do it almost without thinking. Mix the dry ingredients, cut in the lard until it resembles coarse meal. Add the buttermilk and stir just until combined. Turn out onto a floured board, pat to thickness, cut with the rim of a glass because they had no biscuit cutter. She worked quickly and efficiently, and within half an hour she had 6 pans of biscuits in the ovens, golden and perfect. Mrs. Rodriguez checked them and nodded in approval. "You know what you are doing. Good. Set the dining room table while those finish baking." The morning passed in a blur of activity. Breakfast was served and cleared. The kitchen was cleaned. Preparations began immediately for lunch. Georgia worked steadily, following Mrs. Rodriguez's instructions, learning the rhythms and systems of this kitchen, proving herself capable. Xavier came in around mid-morning to fill his canteen from the water pump in the kitchen. He smiled when he saw Georgia elbow-deep in bread dough. "Settling in all right?" he asked. "Yes. Thank you again for everything you did yesterday. I do not think I properly expressed how grateful I am. You are working hard and proving me right to vouch for you. That is thanks enough." He filled his canteen and headed back out, and Georgia tried to ignore the way her heart had sped up when he walked in. The days settled into a routine. Georgia woke before dawn, worked in the kitchen all day, and fell into bed exhausted each night. It was hard work, physically demanding and relentless, but it was honest work and she was good at it. Mrs. Rodriguez began to trust her with more responsibility, and Georgia felt herself becoming stronger, both physically and mentally. She was eating regularly for the first time in months, and color returned to her face. She borrowed needle and thread from Esperanza, and mended the few items of clothing she owned, then used some of her first wages to buy fabric from town and sewed herself 2 more work dresses. Gradually, she began to look less like a survivor of a disaster and more like a normal young woman. She saw Xavier most days, usually at meals or when he came into the kitchen for water or to help carry heavy supplies. They fell into an easy friendship, talking when they had a few free moments, sharing stories about their pasts. Georgia learned that Xavier had 2 younger sisters back in Texas who wrote him letters full of news about their growing families. He showed her their most recent letter, and she could see the love and longing in his face when he talked about them. "You ever think about going back to visit?" she asked. "Sometimes, but it is expensive and would take weeks, and the ranch needs me here. Maybe someday, when I have saved enough money and the timing is right." Georgia told him more about her marriage to Samuel, about how it had been an arrangement more than a love match. She had needed security after her parents died, and Samuel had needed someone to keep house. They had been fond of each other but never passionate, never truly in love. "I thought that was enough," she admitted. "I thought companionship and shared purpose were what marriage was supposed to be. But Samuel kept secrets from me, important secrets about money and debts. When he died, I realized I had never really known him at all." "Do you think you will ever want to marry again?" Xavier asked carefully. Georgia considered the question. "Maybe. If I found someone I could truly trust, someone who would be honest with me about everything. But I am in no hurry. Right now I just want to build my own life, stand on my own 2 feet." "That makes sense," Xavier said, and if there was disappointment in his voice, Georgia told herself she was imagining it. 3 weeks after Georgia arrived at the Double R, Mrs. Rodriguez called her into the small office where she managed the household accounts. "I wanted to tell you that I am very pleased with your work," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "You have proven yourself reliable and skilled. I would like to make your position permanent if you are willing to stay." "I am willing," Georgia said immediately. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Xavier was right about you. You have a good heart and a strong work ethic. Those qualities are more valuable than anything else." Mrs. Rodriguez opened a ledger and made a note. "Your wages will increase to $35 a month starting next month. You have earned it." Georgia felt tears sting her eyes. $35 a month, plus room and board. It was more money than she had ever earned in her life, more security than she had dared dream of just a few weeks ago. That evening she found Xavier in the barn, brushing down Rosie after a long day moving cattle. He looked up when she approached, and the smile that lit his face made her heart do something complicated. "I heard you got made permanent," he said. "Congratulations. I could not have done it without you. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw something in me worth saving." Xavier set down the brush and came to lean against the stall door, close enough that she could smell leather and horse and the faint scent of his soap. "I did not save you, Georgia. You saved yourself. All I did was point you in the right direction. You did more than that. You treated me like a human being when everyone else looked through me like I was invisible. You bought me clothes and food and brought me here. You changed my life. I am glad I could help." His voice was soft, and there was something in his eyes that made Georgia's breath catch. They stood there in the warm dimness of the barn, and Georgia felt the air between them shift, become charged with something she had not felt in years. Possibility. Promise. The sense that something important was beginning. "Xavier," she started, but he shook his head gently. "You said you wanted to build your own life, stand on your own feet. I respect that. You have only been here a few weeks. You are still getting your bearings, still healing from everything you went through. The last thing you need is someone complicating things." "What if I do not think it would be a complication?" Georgia asked softly. Xavier reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers gentle. "Then ask me again in a few months when you have had time to really find yourself again." "I am not going anywhere, Georgia. I will wait." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, this patient promise to wait until she was ready. Georgia nodded, understanding what he was offering. "Time, space, respect. Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being you." Summer faded into fall, and Georgia bloomed like a flower finally given water and sunlight. The weight she had lost came back, filling out her frame in a healthy way. Her hair grew longer, and she learned to braid it like Esperanza did. She laughed more easily, slept without nightmares, began to believe in a future that held more than just survival. She became friends with the other people on the ranch, learning their stories and sharing her own. Carlos, the head wrangler, told her about coming to California from Mexico as a young man, about building a life through hard work and determination. He reminded her of Xavier in many ways, that same quiet integrity and strength. Esperanza became like a sister, and they stayed up late some nights talking about their hopes and dreams. Esperanza wanted to eventually marry and have children, but she was in no hurry. She was enjoying her freedom, enjoying learning how to run the ranch alongside her parents so that someday she could take over. "What about you?" Esperanza asked one night. "What do you dream about?" Georgia thought about the question. "I want a home of my own someday. Nothing fancy, just a small place that is mine. I want to feel secure, to know I will never be hungry or homeless again. And I want someone to share it with, someone who loves me for who I am and not for what I can do for them." "Someone like Xavier?" Esperanza asked with a knowing smile. Georgia felt herself blush. "Maybe. He cares about you, you know. I can see it in the way he looks at you, the way he finds excuses to be wherever you are. He is just waiting for you to be ready. I know. I am almost there, I think. I just needed time to remember who I am, to feel like myself again." October brought cooler weather and the fall roundup. All hands were needed to bring the cattle down from the high pastures before winter came, and the ranch was a flurry of activity. Georgia and Esperanza and Mrs. Rodriguez worked from dawn until late into the night, feeding the extra workers who had been hired for the roundup. Xavier was gone for days at a time, camping in the hills with the other cowboys, and Georgia was surprised by how much she missed him. She had grown used to seeing him every day, to their conversations and his quiet presence. The ranch felt emptier without him. When he finally returned, dusty and tired and sporting a new scar on his cheek from a close encounter with an angry bull, Georgia was embarrassed by how relieved she felt to see him safe. She brought him water and food while he groomed Rosie, and they talked easily about the roundup, about the coming winter, about nothing important and everything important at once. "I missed you," Georgia said suddenly, surprising herself with her honesty. Xavier paused in brushing Rosie's mane. "I missed you too. It is funny how quickly you become used to having someone around, how empty things feel when they are gone." "Xavier," Georgia said, remembering their conversation in this very barn months ago. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you still waiting?" He set down the brush and turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. "Yes, but I do not have to wait much longer, do I?" "No," Georgia said and stepped closer to him. "You do not." Xavier cupped her face in his calloused hands, thumbs stroking gently along her cheekbones. "I have been falling in love with you since the day I saw you step off that stagecoach looking like you had survived a war. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful person I have ever met, Georgia Lawson." "I love you too," Georgia whispered. "I think I have for a while now, but I needed to be sure I was strong enough on my own before I could let myself be vulnerable with someone else. Are you sure now?" "Yes." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Georgia felt something that had been broken inside her finally begin to heal. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Safe and exciting all at once. A choice freely made, not a necessity or a convenience. They stood in the barn holding each other as the last light faded from the sky. And Georgia thought about how far she had come from that terrible day when she had arrived in Tatters with nothing but desperation and determination. Xavier had seen past her circumstances to the person underneath, had given her a chance to prove herself, and in doing so had given her back her life. "Marry me," Xavier said against her hair. "Not right away, not until you are completely ready, but someday. Say you will marry me someday." "Yes," Georgia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you someday." They told Mrs. Rodriguez the next day, and she smiled knowingly as if she had been waiting for this announcement. "It is about time," she said. "I have been watching you two dance around each other for months. Xavier is a good man, Georgia. You have chosen well." "I know," Georgia said. "He saved my life." "No," Mrs. Rodriguez corrected gently. "He gave you an opportunity. You saved your own life. Never forget that." They were married the following spring, on a warm day in April when wildflowers covered the hillsides in carpets of gold and purple. The ceremony took place at the small church in Oroville, with what felt like the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Cheng cried happy tears. Clara Wright from the general store brought a beautiful quilt as a wedding gift. Pete Summers, the stagecoach driver who had given Georgia a ride when she needed it most, came to see her happily settled. Georgia wore a dress of pale blue silk that Esperanza had helped her make, and Xavier wore his best suit with a new white shirt. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears, and Georgia knew she had been right to trust him, to let herself love him. They exchanged vows in front of God and witnesses, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life brought. When the minister said Xavier could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, as if Georgia was precious and fragile, though they both knew she was anything but Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez gave them the use of a small cabin on the ranch property, a two-room structure that had been empty for years. Xavier and several of the other ranch hands spent weeks fixing it up, repairing the roof and the floor, building new furniture, making it into a home. Georgia planted a garden outside the front door, growing vegetables and herbs and flowers. She continued working in the ranch kitchen part-time, but now she also kept house for Xavier, cooking his meals and mending his clothes and making their little cabin into a warm, welcoming space. They were happy in a way that Georgia had never imagined possible. Xavier was everything Samuel had not been: honest, communicative, affectionate. He told her he loved her every day. He asked her opinion about decisions and listened to her advice. He treated her as an equal partner in their life together. At night, after they had made love and lay tangled together in their narrow bed, they talked about their dreams for the future. Xavier wanted to eventually buy a small ranch of his own, build something they could pass down to their children. Georgia wanted to keep growing her garden, maybe sell vegetables and preserves in town. They wanted children, 3 or 4 if they were blessed, and they wanted to grow old together watching the seasons change over the California hills. In September, Georgia realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another month to be certain, then told Xavier one evening as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset. "I am with child," she said simply. Xavier's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified and excited and happy all at once," Georgia admitted. "I never thought I would have children. Samuel and I tried for 3 years with no success. I thought maybe I could not." "Maybe you just needed the right partner," Xavier said, kissing her temple. "We are going to be parents, Georgia. We are going to have a family." She gave birth the following June to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas, after Georgia's father. He had Xavier's dark hair and Georgia's green eyes, and Georgia had never loved anything as fiercely as she loved this tiny person who depended on her for everything. Xavier was a natural father, patient and gentle and completely besotted with his son. He would come home from long days working on the ranch, and immediately take Thomas from Georgia so she could rest, walking the baby around their cabin and singing soft songs in Spanish that Carlos had taught him. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Elizabeth, with blonde hair that surprised them both until Georgia remembered her mother had been blonde. Elizabeth was a firecracker from the start, loud and demanding, and full of personality. Life on the Double R continued, the seasons turning in their eternal cycle. Mr. Rodriguez grew older and began turning more of the ranch operations over to his daughter Esperanza, who proved to be a skilled manager. Xavier was promoted to assistant ranch foreman, a position that came with increased wages and responsibility. Georgia continued to work part-time in the ranch kitchen when she could, bringing Thomas and Elizabeth with her. The children grew up running wild around the ranch, as comfortable with horses as they were with people, learning early about hard work and responsibility. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Georgia on a picnic up into the hills, just the two of them while Esperanza watched the children. They rode double on Rosie, who was older now but still strong, and found a spot overlooking the valley where they could see for miles. "Do you remember the day we met?" Xavier asked, unpacking the basket Georgia had prepared. "Every detail," Georgia said. "I thought you were either crazy or had an angle. I could not believe anyone would be genuinely kind without wanting something in return. And now I know that kindness is just who you are. It is part of your character, woven into everything you do. You saw me at my lowest point and treated me with dignity and respect. You gave me a chance to prove myself. You gave me everything." Xavier took her hand. "You gave me everything too. I was content with my life before I met you, but I was not happy. I was not complete. You filled a space inside me I did not even know was empty." "We saved each other," Georgia said. "You saved me from despair, and I saved you from loneliness. We were two incomplete people who found each other at exactly the right time." They lay back on the blanket, looking up at the brilliant blue sky, and Georgia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and loss, the desperate weeks on the road, the moment of arriving in Oroville in tatters with nothing left but her determination to survive. She thought about Xavier's words that first day. "Clothes do not make you. Your heart does, and yours is gold." He had seen value in her when she could not see it in herself. He had believed in her before she believed in herself. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift anyone could give, the chance to start over, to rebuild, to become the person she was always meant to be. Life was not always easy. They struggled financially sometimes, especially as the children grew and expenses mounted. There were dry years when the ranch barely broke even and everyone had to tighten their belts. There were illnesses and injuries and all the normal challenges of living in a harsh land. But through everything, they had each other. They had love and trust and partnership. They had built something real and lasting, something that could weather any storm. When Thomas was 8 and Elizabeth was 6, Xavier finally saved enough money to buy a small piece of land adjacent to the Double R. It was only 40 acres, but it was theirs, and they built a larger house there with room for their growing family. Georgia was pregnant again, and this time they hoped for another boy to even out the numbers. But when the baby came in the spring of 1886, it was another girl, red-haired and fierce, and they named her Rose after Xavier's mother. She was their last child, and they loved her with the same intensity they loved Thomas and Elizabeth. The children grew tall and strong, learning to ride and rope and work alongside their parents. Thomas proved to have a gift with horses like Carlos and began training colts when he was just 12. Elizabeth wanted to be a doctor, an unusual ambition for a girl, but Georgia and Xavier encouraged her dreams. Rose was still too young to know what she wanted, but she had a gentle way with animals and a singing voice that made everyone stop to listen. Georgia's garden became famous throughout the county. She grew the best tomatoes and squash anyone had ever tasted, and her preserves won prizes at the county fair 3 years running. She sold her surplus in town, and the extra income helped them pay off their land faster than they had dared hope. Xavier became ranch foreman of the Double R when the previous foreman retired, a position of great responsibility and respect. He managed the cowboys and the day-to-day operations, and Mr. Rodriguez trusted him completely. The extra wages allowed them to save money for the children's futures, to start planning for the day when each of them would need help getting started in their adult lives. On their 10th anniversary, Georgia woke to find Xavier already awake, watching her in the early morning light. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, snuggling closer. "About how lucky I am, about how my life turned out better than I ever imagined possible, about how I almost missed you." "What do you mean?" "That day I saw you get off the stagecoach, I almost did not approach you. I almost decided it was not my business, that someone else would help. But something made me walk across that street. Maybe it was fate or God or just dumb luck. But whatever it was, I am grateful every single day that I listened to it." Georgia kissed him softly. "I am grateful too. You gave me my life back. You showed me that I was worth loving, worth fighting for. You saw past my circumstances to who I really was." "I saw a woman with a gold heart," Xavier said. "That is all that has ever mattered to me." They made love slowly in the quiet dawn, and afterward lay tangled together listening to the sounds of their children beginning to stir in their rooms down the hall. This was happiness, Georgia thought. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of love and security and belonging. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and holidays and the changing seasons. Thomas grew into a fine young man and fell in love with Esperanza's daughter, Maria, a sweet girl who had grown up alongside him. They married when Thomas was 22, and Georgia became a grandmother at 45. Elizabeth went east to medical school in Philadelphia, shocking everyone and making her parents incredibly proud. She wrote long letters about her studies and the difficulty of being a woman in a field dominated by men, but her determination never wavered. She was her mother's daughter after all, and she had learned early about perseverance. Rose took over much of the garden work from Georgia as she got older, expanding it and turning it into a serious business. She had a gift for growing things, and plants seemed to thrive under her care in ways that bordered on magical. Xavier's hair began to gray at the temples, making him look distinguished rather than old. He remained strong and vital, working alongside men half his age and keeping pace with all of them. Georgia's hands developed calluses from years of work, and her face gained lines around her eyes from years of smiling. But Xavier told her often that she was more beautiful at 40 than she had been at 23. They took a trip back to Texas when they were both in their early 50s, traveling by train to visit Xavier's sisters and their families. It was the first time Georgia had met them, and she was nervous, but Xavier's family welcomed her with open arms. His sisters loved her immediately, grateful to her for making their brother so happy. They spent 3 weeks in Texas, enjoying the flat landscape and the different pace of life, but both of them were glad to return to California at the end of it. The ranch country around Oroville had become their home in a way nowhere else could be. When Thomas and Maria presented them with their first great-grandchild, a boy named Xavier Jr., Georgia held the tiny baby and marveled at the circle of life. She thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Oroville 30 years ago, broken and desperate and alone. If someone had told that woman she would someday hold her great-grandson in her arms, surrounded by a large, loving family in a home she owned, she never would have believed it. But here she was, and it was all real. Xavier found her on the porch one evening when she was 60, rocking gently in the chair he had built for her 20th anniversary. He sat in the chair beside her, taking her hand like he had 1,000 times before. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying a simple ranch foreman instead of someone who could have given you an easier life?" Georgia looked at him in surprise. "Never, not once. You gave me everything that matters. Love, respect, partnership, family. What more could I possibly want? I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am happier than I ever imagined possible. You saved my life, Xavier. And I do not just mean that day in Oroville, though you did save me then. You save me every day by being exactly who you are, by loving me the way you do, by building this life with me." Xavier raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You saved mine too. I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You gave me purpose and joy and a reason to build something lasting. Every good thing in my life flows from the day I decided to walk across that street and talk to a woman in tatters who I could somehow tell had a heart of gold." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Closer, they could smell the roses Georgia had planted years ago, their perfume sweet in the cooling air. "We have had a good life," Georgia said softly. "The best life," Xavier agreed. "And we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, God willing. Years to watch our grandchildren grow, to see what Thomas and Elizabeth and Rose accomplish, to enjoy the home we built together." "Promise me something," Georgia said. "Anything. Promise me that when my time comes, you will remember that I died happy. That I died knowing I was loved and that my life meant something. Promise me you will not mourn for too long but will celebrate everything we had together." "Georgia," Xavier protested, his voice rough with emotion. "I do not want to talk about that. I know, but I need to say it. I need you to know that you gave me more than I ever dreamed possible. You saw past my circumstances to who I really was. You treated me with dignity when I had nothing. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Whatever happens, whenever my time comes, know that I died grateful for every single day we had together." Xavier pulled her close, and she felt wetness on her cheeks from his tears. "I will remember, I promise." They held each other as darkness fell. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. A life filled with love and purpose, with children and grandchildren, with honest work and quiet contentment. Georgia thought about the scared, desperate woman she had been, and the strong, confident woman she had become. Xavier had been right all those years ago. Clothes did not make a person. Circumstances did not define them. What mattered was the heart, and hers had always been gold, even when she could not see it herself. It just took the right person at the right time, with the vision to see past the surface to the truth underneath. As it turned out, they had many more years together. Xavier lived to be 82, and Georgia to be 79, dying within 6 months of each other as if neither could bear to be without the other for long. They were buried side by side in the church cemetery in Oroville, their graves marked by simple headstones and surrounded by the roses Georgia had loved so much. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to remember them, sharing stories about their love and their generosity and their unshakable partnership. Thomas talked about how his father had taught him that character was more important than wealth. Elizabeth spoke about how her mother had encouraged her to pursue her dreams even when the world said women could not be doctors. Rose told the story she had heard many times about the day her parents met, when Xavier looked at a woman in tatters and saw gold. The family they had built continued on, spreading through California and beyond, each generation carrying forward the values Xavier and Georgia had lived by. Hard work, integrity, kindness to those in need. The understanding that people should be judged by their hearts rather than their circumstances. And in Oroville, people still told the story of the cowboy and the woman who arrived in tatters, the love story that proved that true value lies not in appearance or wealth, but in the heart. It became a kind of legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that kindness can change lives and that love can bloom even in the harshest circumstances. The little cabin where Xavier and Georgia first lived remained standing for over 100 years, preserved by their descendants as a memorial to where it all began. People would visit it and imagine that first night when two people who had survived their own kinds of hardship found shelter and hope together. The ranch house they built was expanded by later generations, but still stood on that same 40 acres Xavier had bought with his savings. The garden Rose had tended grew wild eventually, but roses still bloomed there every spring, red and pink and white, a living reminder of the love that had been planted in that soil. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light slanted golden across the hills, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the fields, a tall man and a woman with green eyes, still together after all these years, still in love, still living proof that one moment of kindness can echo through eternity. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was a simple story of one person seeing another person's true worth and giving them a chance to prove it, of patience and respect and genuine care, of two incomplete people finding completeness together. It was a story of how clothes do not make a person, but hearts do, and how two gold hearts brought together by chance and choice can create something that lasts forever. In the end, that was all that mattered. Not the hardships they had endured separately, but the life they had built together. Not the circumstances of their meeting, but the love that grew from it. Not the tatters Georgia wore when she arrived, but the strength and beauty that Xavier had seen past them to recognize. Their legacy was not measured in wealth or fame, but in the family they raised, the values they instilled, and the proof they provided that goodness and love and kindness still exist in the world, even in the hardest times, even on the dusty streets of small California towns, even in the Wild West where life could be brutal and short. Xavier and Georgia Davidson lived long, full, happy lives. They faced challenges and overcame them. They loved deeply and were deeply loved in return. They built something lasting out of nothing, creating beauty from despair and hope from desolation. And it all started with one simple choice: to see a person rather than circumstances, to offer help rather than judgment, to believe that everyone deserves a chance to prove their worth. That was the true gold in the story, not Georgia's heart alone, but the combined hearts of two people who chose love and kindness in a world that did not always value such things. They proved that sometimes the best treasures are not found in mines or rivers, but in the connections we make with each other, in the families we build, in the lives we touch through simple acts of human decency. Their children carried those lessons forward, teaching their own children, who taught theirs. The ripple effects of that one afternoon in 1876, when Xavier Davidson walked across a dusty street to help a stranger, continued to spread outward, touching more lives than either of them could have imagined. because that is what love does. It multiplies and spreads and transforms everything it touches. It turns tatters into silk, despair into hope, loneliness into belonging. It sees gold where others see only worthlessness, and in seeing it, makes it real. That was the true story of Xavier and Georgia Davidson, the cowboy and the woman who arrived in tatters. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A true story about real people who chose to be good and kind and loving in a world that often rewarded none of those things. A story about how one moment of seeing someone truly can change everything. And if you go to Oroville today, you can still find their descendants, still living on that land, still growing roses in that garden, still telling the story of how it all began with a simple truth. Clothes do not make you, your heart does. And George's heart and Xavier's too were gold.